North Smithfield School Committee meeting of December 18th, 2018 to order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Lombardi?
Present.
Mrs. Sherris? Here. Mr. Cornell? Is absent. Mrs. Johannes?
Here.
Mr. Jones?
Here.
Mrs. Mayo?
Here.
Mrs. Vada?
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum. Pledge of allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I see a big crowd here today, so I assume there's going to be a lot of public comment, community comments, so I'll call a vote. Does anybody want to speak? Okay, hearing none, I'll move to the consent agenda. Does anybody want to take anything off the consent agenda or have any questions?
I actually would like to take off 5A1.
So does anybody want to take anything else off? If I don't want to take 7 off, but I agree with it 1,000%, but I just wanted to know, is there a number not to exceed, like how much of the budget you expect to spend on this?
By putting in this request, we figured on a number not to exceed 5,000 that was mentioned at the last school committee meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to pass the consent agenda 1 through 12, except for 5A1. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion's been made.
Second.
And seconded. A roll call.
Mr. Lombardi?
Aye.
Mrs. Sherris? Yes. Mrs. Johannes?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Mayo?
Yes.
Mrs. Vada? Yes. Motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. 5A1, Mrs. Mayo.
I would just like to say that I wish Janice wonderful retirement. She has made a big difference in the lives of a lot of students, and that happens after 26 years. She and her smile and her upbeat attitude will definitely be missed, and I think we have to thank her for everything that she has done and wish her a happy retirement.
Okay, we can file the resolution of whatever the documents. Send her, thank her for her service. Thank you. Okay, so I'll entertain a motion. Does anybody else have any questions? Steve? I'll entertain a motion to pass under the consent agenda 5A1.
So moved.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. We'll move down to reports. The Rhode Island. You want to do any presentations?
Yes.
So
So that's for the,
broadcast.
that's why we have the crowd tonight, because I'm going to be talking about standards, man. Brace yourselves. It's going to be fabulous. So I'm here tonight. I am going to present our RICAS data. So RICAS is Rhode Island Comprehensive Assessment Program. But before we do that, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about just a brief history of the standards-based movement. There's been so much in the newspaper and all sorts of articles about the RICAS. I think having a little bit of the brief history. And so I do have it up behind, a screen up behind you. So, the dates I did by memory. So, you know, I could be a couple of years off here and there, but it really started in 1983 when President Ronald Reagan had commissioned a Nation at Risk report, which really just identified the United States as having failing schools. In 1989, there was a milestone when the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics actually created standards, and they were the first standards in the United States. And they were mainly for 4th and 8th grade, and then they branched out from there. But it was the math teachers that started the standards movement. In 1993, our neighbors to the north in Massachusetts had really one of the most dramatic changes in a generation, and it was the Massachusetts Education Reform Act. in mid-1990s, and this is where I started guessing, Rhode Island implemented the standards, new standards reference assessment, but that was only in 4th and 8th grade because we only had standards in 4th and 8th grade. So it's basically, if you can say, by mid-1990s, we're starting with standards. And the first step for Rhode Island, Massachusetts actually implemented the MAS frameworks, and they built standards, and we also built standards. And so our standards were the grade level expectations, and we partnered with Vermont and New Hampshire and developed the NECAP assessment to assess the grade level expectations. Massachusetts pretty much did the same thing, but they developed their MAS frameworks, and they developed the MCAS to assess their standards. The biggest difference was that Massachusetts standards were a lot more rigorous than the grade level expectations. And so that plays out over the years because assessment really drives instruction. Assessment tells the teachers, when you analyze the data, where do I need to focus? Where's our strengths? Where's our weaknesses? And because the grade level expectations, there are a few areas of weakness within the grade level expectations, plus they weren't as rigorous as the standards. So then come along in 2008, the Common Core standards. This is probably, we're going to look back on education, and this is going to be huge. Just like we looked back in 1993 when Massachusetts, made their changes. In 2008, when our country had really embraced the Common Core standards. The Common Core standards were based on Massachusetts frameworks because they were clear and they were concise and they were by grade level and they're rigorous and they're measurable. So really excellent educational standards to build curriculum, instruction, and programs by. So by going to the Common Core standards for Massachusetts, it really wasn't a heavy lift because Common Core was really built on Massachusetts. For other states, it was a much heavier lift because they may have had standards, but they weren't as rigorous or there were just more significant differences. So with Common Core, our state and many other states had the PARC assessment, and that's the assessment that we chose to assess our Common Core standards and how we're doing. In 2018, this is the first year that our students actually took the MCAS, we call it RICAS. Now this is pretty monumental, and I think it was a very bold decision by the commissioner to go with MCAS, bringing it to Rhode Island. So the MCAS was written based on the Massachusetts standards, and they upgraded to the Common Core just like we did. So it's all aligned to the Common Core standards, and the students are assessed. So they started this in the 90s. And it's been tweaked over the years, but it's an assessment that they definitely have in place for 20 years. We took it last year for the first year, and we have our results. And so I just wanted to frame the conversation with where we are and how we get here. We've been doing some good work, but quite frankly, Massachusetts did it better. And it is what it is. We can't go back in time. We can't make different decisions in the state of Rhode Island because they started out 20 years ago with better standards. And when it comes down to it, and I've said it many times when I'm here talking about anything really, it always comes back to the standards, and they just had quality standards from day one. So we now have quality standards and we have a quality assessment. We are not changing the MCAS when we implement it. We changed the name to RICAS, Rhode Island Comprehensive Assessment System. But we're not in collaboration with Massachusetts. Massachusetts basically said, you can purchase this. You cannot make one decision, you don't have any input. And quite frankly, that's good for us. I think that we're purchasing a quality test that has stood the test of time, and it has the trust of the educational community. So we know when we get these results, it means something. And so, if you don't mind clicking for me. So, before we get to the results though, I just have to do a little refresher on standards. So whenever we do an assessment, it's based on the standards. And sometimes, and it pains me when I hear this, is people say, oh, you're teaching to the test. Now 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, people teaching to the test would be, you're teaching this really narrow, horrible, 20 question thing, and you're not a good quality teacher who's teaching higher order thinking skills. And so we all know that to be true when we think of the past. The biggest difference now is the tests have changed. The tests aren't narrow. The tests have a really wide scope. The assessments assess students on higher order thinking skills. And so when you hear someone saying, are you teaching to the test? Well, you can't really teach to the test. You can only teach to the standard. And I just want to show you an example of that. So this is, are you smarter than a fifth grader? This is one of our fifth grade standards. It's an ELA writing standard. And an example of that writing standard is this is what a student would have to do on the assessment. And this is our RICAS released assessment. This question, you'll write an essay based on the passages you're writing should present and develop a central idea, provide evidence and details, use correct grammar, spelling, and punctuation. So based on, and they have to read two passages, Hatchet and Wild Van Island, they write an essay that describes the challenges that Brian and Andy face and explains how each character overcomes those challenges. And they have to use information from both passages to develop their essay. And so when we're teaching that, we have to teach really good reading strategies and writing strategies. So what does a fifth grade essay look like? Now this is the big difference than it was 10 years ago for fifth grade. This is a 5-paragraph essay, and we could write 5-paragraph essays, but our standards made for GLEs were more broad, whereas these standards, they're literature-based, and so I have to read two challenging passages, and I have to bring evidence from the passage to prove my point. And so if I'm not going to read it out loud to you, but if you read it, it is clear, it is organized, there's great word choice, good sentence structure, great evidence from the text, there's claims, there's evidence to support the claims, a solid conclusion. So this is what a student who met the standards, that's what it looks like on RICAS. That make sense? Okay. Go next. Now for math, same thing. We have standards, and then it tells us what we have to teach, and then an example of the standard. You can click to the next page, Mike. Thank you. And this would be a RICAS example of a fifth grader. And again, you can't necessarily teach to the test because the test isn't just the simple calculation. Students have to solve multi-step problems. In this particular problem, the floor of Sophia's bathroom is in the shape of a rectangle. She covered the floor with square tiles as shown, and you can see the graph. So her questions are, what is the width in feet of the floor? She has to enter that. Then she has to write an equation that can be used to find S, the area in square feet of the floor. And then part C, she has to use her equation for part B to find S, the area in the square foot of the floor. And part D, she bought a rug, but the rug only covers 2/3 of the floor. What is the area in square feet of the rug? So not of the floor anymore, what's the area in square feet of the rug? And she has to explain how she got her answer. So even if you get the right answer, you have to really explain how you got it. For a student to be able to do that, there's a lot of teaching and learning going on. There's a lot of dialogue. And so when you hear, and you may hear in the future, like, well, that district, they teach to the test. This is the test. There is no teaching to it. It's teaching fractions, it's teaching area, it's teaching all the good math concepts. And so I just wanted to be really clear about that. So the next thing I wanted to show you is really how did we do? And this is our baseline year. So in reading, we were number 3 in the state, so I say bravo to us. We were behind, number 1 was, what are they
New
called?
Shore.
What?
New Shore.
New
Block
Shore,
Island.
which is Block Island. There are 12 kids. But number 2 was Barrington, and number 3 was North Smithfield. And I think that's just huge for us. I think that I'm just really proud of where we are as a district. And you can see that the students who met or exceeded, the percent of students that met or exceeded the standards by grade level, and you can also see the state averages by grade level. And so it looks like, we dipped down maybe in 7th grade, but the whole state did, so we're still 26% above the state average, which is a very comfortable place to be. So is there room for growth? Absolutely. Are we using the data to inform our instruction? Yes. Did we have an entire day of planning session today about this very data? Absolutely. So we're using it. but for a baseline, I couldn't be happier for where we are. So that's where we are for ELA. For math, it's not as comfortable, but it's a solid baseline. So for math, we're 14th in the state. When I compare us to the state, I always compare us to districts. So there's 36 districts and we're number 14. Not as comfortable with that. I like to be higher than that. But honestly, I do think it's accurate. One of the big things that we have, an advantage in ELA that we haven't had in math for the last 15 years, is the interventions and supports have been in place. And we know that, and you all know that, and I know that you are absolutely building the system and structure for math, and we've been building all along steadily, but it's just taking time. So if you look, we're definitely above the state average, between 12 and 25% above the state average in every area. The state, when the state dips down, we dip down. And so, for the very bottom one, you can see, well, what's our total? We had 44% of our students meet or exceed the standard. The state average was 27, so we're 17% above the state average. We have a lot of work to do, and we're just going to keep plugging along at math and keep building the system in structure and having professional learning communities with our teachers, being really strategic and specific of how we teach the standards and what we expect students to do to show that they know and understand the standards. We're regularly changing our assessments. One of the big things, there wasn't as much of a change between RICAS and PARC ELA, but there was a significant difference between the PARC math and the RICAS math. And one of them was that, I'll say in 5th grade we have 30 standards. Well, those 30 math standards are broken up into major content, supporting content, and additional content. And they're identified that, the major content, if you don't understand the concept of a division, you're in trouble. That's major. If you don't know this geometry concept of a concentric circle, that's additional. You can live without that. And so they were really clear about, PARC was really clear about the strength of the standards, which ones were emphasized. And the assessment emphasized those. We emphasized the major content standards. And by doing so, we de-emphasize the ones that aren't as important. NPAS is different. Every standard has the same amount of weight. And so we may not have put as much emphasis on some of our geometry standards as we had our major content standards, or number sense or fractions. On the assessment, they're all the same amount of weight. You can have as many geometry questions for as many points as you do, fractions. And so that's just the biggest shift in the world, but it is a shift. And the other thing, and I never want to make excuses, but I do just want to mention, because it's a reality, is last year, during our RICAS first administration, we lost internet during the entire middle school in all of Hallowell was doing math assessment testing. And it was not Adam Stanley's fault. And he fixed it. It was right. Do you remember what it was? Like Cox had changed something and it went down. We lost it for over an hour. Students started testing. Then they had to sit in front of a computer for an hour, waiting for the test to come on. It came back on. Students finished the test, but it was really close to lunch. And magically, they were all done in 15 minutes in time for lunch. It was like, so I'm just letting you know, we called the state to let the state know that happened and all that. But so I just want to let you know that I don't think that was our best. And I'm sure that had an impact on our results. So just thought I'd mention that. The next thing I wanted to talk about was growth. So when the state had shared the RICAS results with us, they also did growth percentiles. And what they did is they said, well, I'm going to compare Jean, who scored maybe a 3 on PARC or a 4 on PARC in 4th grade. And now Jean's in 5th grade. Well, I'm going to compare Jean to all the other kids that also scored a 4 on PARC like her and see how did she grow in comparison to the peers in Rhode Island that also scored a 4. And that's the way we get the student growth percentile. And from that, you can get the average student growth by district. And so we had gotten all this data, we dug into it, and what was awesome, because we didn't know it at first, and we're looking, we're ranking, and Mr. St. Jean and I are like, we're number one. We're number one in growth in the state for average student growth in ELA. And we're like, we're awesome. Okay, let's see how we are for math. And we do it for math, and we're like, we're number one in average student growth for math. So we were thrilled about that. We know we have a lot of work to do in math, but we are growing, and we're growing at a faster pace than other communities. And so we're on the right track, and I think we just need to keep going forward and keep doing the work. So from there, what are the next steps? Is really just utilize data to inform the program, which we do regularly. We want to, figure out the strengths and weaknesses of the programs, inform our school community. So this is part of what we're doing in our next steps, and also our parents and how we're doing with our assessments. We want to refine curriculum, instructional practices, and resources. We do that throughout the year during our community of practice days, and I sometimes feel like my admin report always sounds the same, but it's a lot of different days, but it's all different grade levels. So, last month was English at the middle school community practice days, and but what we're doing is we're refining our curriculum, instruction, and assessments, and that's all based on data and what we're learning. We're continuing to implement standards-based professional development. We're continuing to develop, thanks to you all and your support, an intervention system and structure. And that is, it's priceless. And so we're continuing to refine that. And also we're creating engaging, rigorous programs for students to support instruction. So that's where we are, and I think it is a perfectly fine baseline, and I honestly believe we're only going to go up from where we are.